Some shocking news. Politicians exaggerate. Yes, they spin, they bend the truth, they make their ideas and achievements sound grander than the reality, and they sometimes make their opponents' ideas sound worse than they might actually be. Surely there's no one who's surprised by any of these things. It has ever been thus. But is it getting worse? Some people say so, and they point to ads like this during the recent election campaign.
It's the only one talking about a death tax.
A death tax?
Death taxes.
Death tax.
There is a plan for a death tax.
Secret plan for a death tax.
Death tax. Death tax.
Death taxes.
Labor, it's the bill Australia can't afford.
You get the idea. This is worth examining because those of us interested in old-fashioned things like truth and facts have long talked about the post-truth world. It goes hand in hand, really, with the postmodern world, where facts in public debate are often given a lower priority than emotion, virtue signalling and perceived motives. So we ought to demand truth in advertising and in politics. The question is, when is a scare campaign justified and when is it not? Remember when Labor nearly won the election in 2016, Malcolm Turnbull and others complained about the Medi-Scare campaign, saying it was dishonest. But the media wasn't particularly interested then. Now Labor has lost an election that most in the media expected it to win, and some of the post-mortems are a bit more revealing. The Guardian Australia is suddenly preoccupied with truth in politics, and it's published a detailed piece suggesting Labor was hard done by thanks to ads like that death taxes scare. Some Labor MPs still are not sure whether they lost support predominantly because of the contentious tax and spend policies Shorten advanced, the article said, or because of policies he never advanced. A deeply disconcerting experience and one with profound implications for democratic contests in this digital age. Now, this is a big call to suggest it affected the election, but it does fit a pattern. In politics, the left seldom loses graciously. We've seen it blame the Tampa, the News Corp media, the Russians, even at times the voters. But do they have a case this time? Let's be frank, the coalition went hard on Labor over taxes, including a so-called death tax that Labor said it did not support. The trouble is that politicians have created this mess. They're hoist on their own petard. Remember, Labor also promised there'd be no carbon tax and then introduced one. Tony Abbott, for his part, promised no tax increases and then brought in a deficit levy. So was the coalition's scare about a possible death tax defendable? You'll make up your own mind, of course, but there was an ACTU policy document from last year that shows the trade union peak body, which of course has great influence over the Labor Party, believes that consideration should be given to taxing inheritances in the hands of the beneficiary. A lifetime threshold could be made available to the taxpayer, with tax payable once cumulative inheritances exceed the threshold. That's an inheritance tax or a death tax, cutting in at some sort of undisclosed threshold. At the time, the Daily Telegraph reported an ACTU spokesperson as saying an inheritance tax on the wealthiest estates can restore fairness to our tax system and ensure the very wealthy and big business pay tax. And Labor's frontbench has form on this too. Shadow Assistant Treasurer Andrew Lee wrote about inheritance taxes as an academic a decade or so ago. We believe that reinstating an inheritance tax on the super rich would be consistent with the Australian values of egalitarianism and the fair go. Then, of course, there's the Greens, who have pushed for death taxes for years. Leader Richard Di Natale told Parliament in 2016 that if the government and the opposition are serious about fair budget repair, they will seriously consider the super rich death tax to raise $5 billion a year. Now, the Greens backed away from death taxes earlier this year in the lead-up to the election, but we all know that if Labor had won, the Greens would have held enormous sway, just as they did back when the carbon tax was brought in. Put all this together and there's more than enough justification to at least raise the prospect of death taxes. And of course, Labor wasn't really helped by the fact it was proposing a long list of tax increases on incomes, property investments, share investments and superannuation. So many that Bill Shorten got caught out.
Can you rule out no new or increased taxes on superannuation? Yeah, we have no plans to increase taxes on
That's
superannuation.
different to ruling it out, though.
We have no plans to introduce any new taxes on superannuation.
So will you rule it out?
Sure.
Fact. Bill Shorten has $34 billion in superannuation taxes.
Good questioning by Sky News' James O'Doherty there, turned into a Liberal Party ad because of that answer from Bill Shorten. Yep, Labor got hit hard on taxes, and a blatant scare on death taxes was part of it. But the real vulnerability came from Labor's proposals to raise an extra $387 billion in taxation. Reality had more to do with this scare campaign than exaggeration. Labor needed to respond strongly, much like the Coalition had to about Mediscare. If The Guardian Australia wanted to chase down some missing facts from the election, it might ask some different questions, like how much Labor's dramatic climate and energy policies would have cost. Why wouldn't Labor answer that question? And how could any politician actually suggest that policies to reduce carbon emissions in Australia could end the drought, reduce floods, or make bushfires and cyclones less damaging? These sorts of crazy claims were the real post-truth part of the campaign, and the media did far too little to expose any of them. But the voters saw right through all of that just the same.